It is very, very rare that anyone ever really admits that there is about to break out a civil war. Now, there may be some outliers here and there, but no one really says, oh, actually, there is going to be a civil war. This is why it's going to happen. And yet, today on Conservative Home, we covered David Gauck yesterday, Tory centrist, left the party in 2019 because of the election of Boris Johnson, who predicted almost, not completely, but said that what is about to happen would be a complete and absolute disaster show. And as a result, was having huge Schadenfreude. If you've seen him anything on Twitter like recently, he's been laughing all the way to the bank from this. And then, of course, on that very same day, you have Nigel Farage talking to Tories to say, hey, don't vote for the Conservatives, come vote for reform on Conservative Home. Meanwhile, of course, you also have Henry Hill, the main, if not one of like the political blog writers, especially someone who has broken out of the blog itself and appears very often on TV to talk about the Conservative Party, is writing a blog going, yeah, we are going to go into what he has described as Tory Wars. And yet, even he cannot admit that this is going to be an absolute slobber knocker of a fight, with both sides going to be tearing chunks out of each other. You do not know how nasty I think this is going to be, but I think it is going to be really nasty when this fight happens. And oh boy, is it going to be a real fight to watch. But even have someone like Henry Hill who can admit that, yeah, we are about to go into a civil war, cannot even bring himself, I think, to pick a side. Because even Conservative Home, sooner or later, even someone like Henry Hill is going to have to pick a side. Now, I'm being a bit presumptuous here, but Henry, if you seriously are saying that there is going to be a Tory war happen, but you are not prepared to pick a side, someone will end up choosing for you. Make no mistake about that. Someone will end up choosing for you. But oh boy, it's going to be interesting seeing how he writes and what he says over the next couple of years. We'll see which side he ends up ends up taking, but nevertheless, will certainly be someone interesting to see what they do over the next couple of years. But before we do get onto this, please do remember to click on the like, the share, the subscribe button down below. There are, of course, the Patreon page, the Buy Me Coffee link where you can well buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course the Pony Club down below as well. And of course, you can click the like and share button as well. And of course, it's going to be another long one today. I know I've done 3 long ones, but I think we've needed to with just the subjects that we've been covering. So off we go over again onto Conservative Home. And with the title of Neither Side in the Looming Tory Wars is yet prepared to be honest about why it failed. And I would say this to Henry Hill: why don't you be the honest one? Why don't you go and be the beacon of honesty? I'll tell you why he won't, because he also saw what David Gauck wrote as well. And yeah, I've seen the comments, and it's quite shocking that there weren't many people agreeing with David Gauck. But hey, there you go. Anyway, there is still, alas, several weeks remaining of this election campaign. I know, but hey, what, three and a bit? What, 3 and a bit to go now, or 2 and a bit? But yeah, it's still going feels like a long time, doesn't it? But anyway, uh, still several weeks remaining of this election campaign. But on the right, the blame game has already started. Yep, and it's the right who should be taking a lot of that blame. Like I say, they've been the ones in charge. They've got no one else to blame but themselves. And because they cannot accept any blame or even any introspection, they are going to be infighting for a decade, if not more. And I keep on talking about this because I mention it in every single video, but this frees up so much room for us to go forward and do progressive things. You know, take the opportunity, guys. But there you go. And partly this is why I'm also constantly covering these looming Tory civil wars. You know, that's even why I haven't covered some of the stuff in the manifestos, just because I think this is a bit more important to really try and cover what's about to happen, because I think it's almost a moment in history we are about to witness. But anyway, back to this. So the blame game was already started. We staged quite a bout on this page this morning with David Gauke in the red corner, Nigel Farage also in the turquoise. Within the party, this row will now likely be suppressed, if not entirely silenced, of course, until election day. Even if leadership hopefuls are, of course, making a nuisance of themselves behind the scenes. Something else we've talked about as well. But they will probably not want to run the risk that they are putting their ambitions above the campaign. Given the fact that you've just yourself admitted, Henry, and of course, we've seen that happening, I think they are putting their own ambitions in front of this campaign, because Grant Shapps came out, I think it was today or yesterday. Actually, no, yesterday, because I'm doing this today. He came out and said, "Oh, this campaign's lost." So, oh yes, ambition over campaign completely, because why else would you take part in the rest of this campaign? Maybe to try and save your seat. But hey, it's not going to go well for them. Not going to go well for many of them. Anyway, nor, of course, will party members still be out there trying, sometimes despite the politicians' best efforts, to return Tory MPs. He also, bear in mind, Henry Hill also wrote today in The Guardian a piece about grassroots Tories being absolutely furious with this campaign. Absolutely furious, not only at CCHQ, their own local Tory MPs, each other different Tory MPs. It was hilarious, but I thought we'd go over this one rather than this. I think this really, as we said, highlights the civil wars that are about to break open. But the bloodletting will come, and the outcome will shape the Conservative Party for a decade or more. And that decade, that fighting, will result most probably in a right-wing victory, which will torpedo completely the party for a decade. And the infighting will not stop. It will not stop, because they have grown to love infighting. So, back to this. So, most likely, the actual debate within the party will fall mostly between two poles. Yes, it is the fault of the left-right, the now limined by our contributors this morning. Yeah, for all they have very different politics, almost polar opposite diagnoses, there is now a common thread in both cases for the prosecution: the gulf between word and deed. Here's Farage saying, "But the hard truth is, after 14 years of government, marked by many unfulfilled pledges and broken promises under 4 prime ministers, the Conservative Party is now a broken band." And Gauke, who said Frost negotiated his Brexit deal, Priti Patel was Home Secretary in charge of immigration policy, and the policies pursued were not what the right wanted. Perhaps responsibility lies here, or with even their chosen prime minister. The chasm, of course, between Britain's political debate and its actual politics is now so wide as to almost feel Baldarian. Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak pose as tax cutters while trying to allow stealth taxes to quietly carry the overall burden to historic heights. Sentencing rules are now toughened and fresh crackdowns promised, even as shortage of cells see ministers trying to let inmates out early. So even Henry Hill, as I said at the beginning here, can see that for the past 14 years, there have been problems within his own party that even he does not want to acknowledge. But if you want to actually, fix your party, Henry, someone has to be honest. And hey, the saying goes, don't shoot the messenger. And someone's going to be that messenger. And Henry Hill knows full well the overwhelming comments on David Gauke's piece were incredibly negative. Even though I feel, and again, I disagree with David Gauke and all his pretty much all his sort of politics and etc. But hey, he got the big problems about the Conservative Party in that article almost spot on. And yet here you are trying to thread the needle. Oh, so both parties are guilty of it. Wait. So, okay, you can say that the centrists, the wets, the conservative Camerites were in charge, of course, from 2010 and etc. And then, of course, Brexit happened, and then the right wing ultimately took over, who really drove things, I think, even more harder off a cliff edge. And a lot of people, I think, in the coming civil wars are going to try and blame a lot of stuff on Cameron. And don't get me wrong, Cameron does deserve a lot of the blame. But the big problems that the Conservative Party facing have been far more recent than David Cameron. Under Boris Johnson, under Theresa May, under Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, all those problems started under Cameron, got worse under Johnson, and now are laid bare for all to see. We talked about this all the way back when Boris Johnson was in, that he was desperately trying to paper over the cracks that were appearing in the Conservative Party, and that sooner or later those cracks would just be unfixable. This is where we are. Anyway, so both parties are, of course, guilty of it. The more urgent the crisis, the more magical the thinking. Take housing. The Conservatives pretend in a single paragraph on page 52 of their manifesto that they will embark on a Baron Haussmann-style total reconstruction of central London to help deliver 1.6 million homes in the next parliament. Labour, meanwhile, touts pretty pictures of Castle Streets, pretty pictures from Create Streets of illegal houses that would almost certainly be kept illegal. So here's the thing. If you've had a party that has failed to deliver on housing, and if anything, made the housing crisis worse, let's see what Labour does when they get in. And if they end up fixing the housing crisis, then hey, maybe they were right. But Create Streets, we'll see what happens. Anyway. However, Keir Starmer's failures, lie in the future, or probably his successors. Hey, be fair here, Henry. But then again, he can't even be honest about his state of his own party here. But there you go. Our parties are, of course, the world we live in. So, if both sides do agree on this disconnect between the Conservatives' stated and revealed politics, the question of the coming battle will hinge on why this has come about. And you cannot be honest. You cannot be honest about why that has come about. It has been ideological. It has been ideological battles fought between both parties constantly and consistently. And this entire reliance on it, you can't even admit that that's a problem with your own party. But the battles are going to be incredibly ideological based on all these different lines that we have seen, even along Brexit, housing, immigration, etc. So this continues. So, and on this, I haven't seen even much evidence from any quarter of a convincing answer yet. Consider again our two pugilists. Farage, of course, doesn't actually set out for a case why the Tories have failed so totally. As he claims, on the face of it, that it's reasonable, he's trying to complete with the Conservative Party, not treat it. Electorally, the bold statements around the fact of the failure are enough. That's true. You've been the party most in power with an overwhelming majority as well. The failure is yours and yours alone. Yeah, for any reader talking about voting for reform and the other majority of our panelists who would then favour the lead of the Tory whip would then return to Parliament, the absence of any deeper analysis would give, of course, a far deeper one for concern. It is, after all, very, very easy to say that you do things when there is no prospect of you actually having to do them. If Farage wake is not littered with failed initiatives and broken promises, then there is no small part because of he has no experience of actual executive office. UKIP's record in the European Parliament does not suggest that any diligent engagement with any of the tedious realities of government is yet a hallmark of Farage's policies. Interesting that he's bringing up, the UKIP's record in the European Parliament. People have brought that up time and time again. That hasn't unfortunately stopped Farage. No matter how much you bring that up, because hey, we've tried. Like we've tried for a number of years to bring up Farage on the European Fisheries Council and what happened there. Yeah, unfortunately, that even now didn't break through, shall we say. I doubt it's going to break through trying to bring it up even now. So, and also, even if you do think, as Gork suggests, that the failure of the past few years are down to, quote, the Remainer establishment, the civil service, the OBR, the Bank of England, and the Justiciary, etc., you still need a proper understanding of how they won and how to beat them. Otherwise, quote, a new voice of opposition will stand up to the Labour government, as is all right-wing politics will amount to. Interesting. I think Henry Hill isn't being fair, considering that I've just read and done the video about David Glauc's article. Because he was not suggesting that. He was not suggesting that. You know, even if you do think, as Glauc suggests, your failures down there, you don't really need a proper understanding of, quote, how they won, how to beat them. Because you're still thinking, put it this way, Henry Hill is trying to cross a bridge he hasn't even built yet. There needs to be a proper, genuine, retrospective look. Like the Conservative Party needs to look itself in the mirror and actually go, okay, what did we do wrong? How did we lose? Why did we do this? The Labour Party did this a number of times. Parties have done this, but the Conservative Party has never ever done that because it is insistent that no matter what it has been doing, that its ideology has been right. And it needs to take a very, very big look in the mirror at itself. But, back to this. So now this brings us to the counter case. But the decline in the competence and in trust is now inexorably linked to the move to the right. The Brexit wars of 2016 to 2019 resulted in a weak cabinet that saw a commitment to the Brexit cause prioritised over ability. The Tories maintained the Leave campaign's habit of promising the undeliverable. This, or variations of it, is becoming the official fairy tale of the Tory left, or should I say, the liberal centre right. Everything was fine, and then Brexit happened. And then everything was terrible. If only that hadn't happened. Okay, Gork just said there, because that was a piece from Gork's line as well. And even Gork's full article, it wasn't just about Brexit, it was everything around Brexit, the whole ideology that drove that as well. So I think we can clearly see maybe which side Henry Hill is going on. But even then, there is austerity that the Tories would still have to answer for. For the Cameron Osborne years, that is still something true that the Tories would still have to answer for in their in their manifesto, in their doings of what they did. The whole switch to universal credit and all the problems that are still doing and causing to this day. But anyway, on with this. Even on the face of it, if this version of events does feel like a bit like saying that things were pretty comfortable on board the ship before it hit the rocks, it is a pretty miserable afterwards, then it might be true. But it invites and does not answer the question of why the rocks were hit in the first place. So, was promising the undeliverable really a novel vice for Brexiteers? It was David Cameron, after all, who stood for an election on 2010 on a pledge to get net immigration down to the tens of thousands, and then did so again in 2015 when it was significantly higher. I think there is room in the party for people who care about immigration, he says today. Once again, you look at immigration, how it was being doing, how the Conservatives handled immigration. Yeah, they really did fail on that spectacularly. So I've said it, Cameron is not, blameless. They have to really look back to when they first got back in power. And I think that goes all the way back to when they took power back in the coalition government. So, and on Brexit, it was Cameron who promised to, quote, get what Britain needs in Brussels and didn't. He then promised to implement the British people's decision in the referendum and quit. Well, he didn't have to, because it was it wasn't a like a serious referendum of we will do this. It was like, hey, do you actually want to do this? And then he decided to do it, or at least they decided to do it with just a 2% majority. There was a ton of stuff I think you can and rightly criticize David Cameron for. And I think he could have come out and said, well, we've seen the British people's decision, but it's not a clear majority. We'll try again and do this in a couple of years. Yeah, he might have got Farage on his case. There might have been a couple of angry Tories, but he would have been able to ride this out. I think he would be able to ride it out, but he didn't have the backbone to do it. He didn't have the backbone to do it, because he would have had to have taken on the right wing of his party. Once again, you see the problem. It is the fact that the Tory party has become so fractured. And it goes all the way back to David Cameron. So, the liberal, of course, centre-rightist myth of the fairies might argue that this was just simply a sensible man foolishly dabbling in the follies of the right, an attempt to try and appease them. Well, it was an attempt to try and appease them. Let's not say that anything that it wasn't. Can we, of course, indict that the pre-2016 Conservative leadership are on its own terms? Yes, we can. Focusing on 2016 as an inflection point does flatter the architects of the world before it, because it does suggest that all of what is wrong with Britain today is rooted in that one time that they didn't get their own way. But important as Brexit was, Britain's relationship with the EU is not even close to the most important factor explaining its present sorry state. Oh, yeah, it was the party's own, internal foolings, and it was its arguments about Europe that caused open, conflicts, that caused Cameron to call that general election, to call that referendum. Anyway, the UK's GDP and the UK's GBDGP per capita, the actually most important measure of how preposterous we are, not how many people we've added to the economy, has fallen flat since 2007, as have real wages. And of course, bear in mind, what did we have? We had the financial crash that really affected things. Really affected things significantly. Have the Tories got us out of that? Did they successfully re-energize the economy? No, they didn't. They went into austerity. And as many people said, austerity was a political choice by the Conservatives. They could have gone in a myriad, if they wanted to, a myriad of different directions, but no, they chose austerity. And here we are. And of course, we are 20 years out into the housing price crisis. By 2016, average rents had risen every year above inflation since 1989. And again, what was Cameron's plan to do that? You are right. They do need to have a big introspective look. And they ain't going to do it. They are not going to do it, which is hilarious. So the era of any sensible government did nothing about the first two. And it responded to the latter by pummeling even more credit into the shortage by inventing a man trap for young people's savings. Even as ministers insisted that importing more and more people a year was essential to sound economic stewardship, there was no adequate action on housing. And for all the touted focus on apprenticeships, the number of employees pleading shortages to get visa extensions tripled between 2009 and 2019. And yeah, the apprenticeship scheme was a failure of the Conservative government. Like, it was massively so. Apprenticeships can be a massive opportunity to really help a lot of people get into some really good jobs, and it's not. It's abused by really big companies, which is really sad. But there you go. So it goes on. We built our last reservoir in 1992, even though large parts of England now suffer from avoidable drought in the summer. Again, that's because the Tories handed it over to private interests. The last reservoir was built under, it was built under when we actually owned the water before the Tories sold it off. And private companies have just had no interest in doing that because building a reservoir takes a lot of money to build. They've had no interest to do that. The power to approve new reservoirs under the Planning Act of 2008 was in ministers' hands throughout the coalition. They didn't use it, but Ken Clarke did shut down a perfectly good prison, HMP Lancaster, before he'd wanted to do it in the 1990s. No new reservoirs were approved. That's wrong, but there you go. Most, of course, damningly, that Cameron and George Osborne did austerity terribly. Instead of actually making strategic choices, again, Henry Hill being, I think, quite right on here, of trying to protect key budgets by rolling back the state elsewhere, they tried to minimize political pain and the need to make decisions by salami slicing every budget. The result of what our columnist John Oxley dibs, the actual shit state Toryism. It's as big as ever But nothing works, and public spending obligations are now less sustainable than ever, but the public's appetite for cuts is gone. No one really wants or wanted cuts to begin with in the first place. Everyone wants good public services. There is now, I think, has to be a question of what has gone on with our public services. Why are they such in a bad state as they are? Funding is certainly, I think, one question, but we also have to look what else is going on. And I think that is certainly something that Labour is going to have to tackle when they get in. Why are our public services in such a bad state? And it is not just going to be, I think, not just about the money. So you get the picture. The point is not that liberal Tories are necessarily wrong in their criticisms of the Tory right. They do see its shortcomings with fierce clarity, and many of their blows are telling. But there is a temptation to skip over, to borrow a phrase, why they lost to such people. That the politics of being moderate and being sensible too often devolves into the politics of the easy short-term decisions. This all adds up in the long run to manifestly inadequate government. But they weren't overall being that, being the centrist, as he's saying here, why did they lose this? Oh, well, it was just, easy politics, short term decision making. That was because Cameron himself wanted these quick, easy wins because he didn't think he would win the next election and started looking at ever shorter reasons. This did lead to more worse, more and more worse governments that the Tories no one really addressed in many ways. Rory Stewart got that right. If you've seen Rory Stewart talking anything about, his time in government on the rest of politics or elsewhere, he gets a lot of that really right. But there you go. So the Tory left, no less than the Tory right, will not be fit for the battle ahead until it can actually face up to why it failed. There will be some very painful reckonings all around on July the 5th. And oh boy, July the 5th, are we going to have some good things? Oh, um, let's see what we wanted. Um, Still a lot of reform people here on here. Oh, actually, here we are. This might be interesting. So, from this one is from Bill. An interesting piece by Henry Hill, and the first I have read on here for a very long time. Conhome was a great start. It was a great site when it started all those years ago. I stopped visiting, save very occasionally before the Brexit referendum. And judging by the very naive and the ignorance of so many of the commenters, not much has changed. As many of us thought at the time, the Conservative Party took a massive wrong turn for itself and the country when Cameron and the modernisers took over. I feel very sorry for our local MP, whose seat is 99% certain to go to the Lib Dems. But having voted Conservative in every general election, I'm looking forward to the long overdue wipeout of the party after 14 years of self serving arrogance, incompetence, which has now wrecked our country. Hey, when even other Tories want this to happen, who knows? But yeah, Henry Hill there trying to thread the needle, saying, "Well, the right wing of our party is just as bad as the left." Meanwhile, of course, Henry Hill sitting in the middle, you know, we'll see what happens to old Henry as the years go on in opposition. I don't think the years in opposition are going to be very kind, if I'm quite frank, to Henry and Conservative Home, which will be very sad because we've had some fun times throughout the years, but I am looking to the absolute carnage that is going to be the Tory Wars to come, because oh boy, they are going to be fantastic because there is a lot of reckoning. Henry Hill is right. On January the 5th, or sorry, on July the 5th, there is going to be a lot of reckoning to come. And I'll tell you what, the thing that they need to do, which is some serious introspection. Because one thing Henry Hill pointed out, why did those Tory moderates lose out to the right wing? One of the things Henry Hill should be pointing out was the fact that the non-parliamentary party started to go ever further right. You don't notice he brought that up, do you? But then, of course, who knows? But anyway, yes, it's been a little long one, so I do apologize. But hey, needs must, as they say. But Ken, thank you very much for watching, and of course, as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, we'll see you all next time.